This episode was originally released as a bonus episode of Real English Radio and is now being released to the public. Enjoy.
I'm the only person who thinks it's difficult to find someone who is interested in the world in general. Because I've been on dates and people are like, yeah, I'm really into going on road trips, and they tell you about it and it's cool, it's fun, or like, yeah, I'm really into NASCAR, I went to see this. And it's like, yeah, that's great. But then I'll ask, so what do you think of only children? And they're like, I've never really thought about it. And I'm like, how have you never thought about the behavior and nature of only children? I'm like, oh yeah, what do you think about cancel culture? Are you interested in that? I don't know. It's like, you don't have any questions about people or the world? You just kind of do stuff and then only think about that? Or is your brain turned on? I don't understand.
What's going on, my friend? You have tuned in to another episode of Real English Radio. I'm your host, Tony Kaizen. And today we're talking about your mentality. We're talking about communication skills. We're talking about the importance of having personal interests and being able to discuss things apart from the things that you're interested in. This is something I mention quite frequently on the podcast. So you already know, once I came across this clip on TikTok, I had to share it with you. Now, in my opinion, there isn't a lot of advanced language in that clip, but I will do a quick summary, right? This girl whose name is Zoe, I believe she's Canadian, and even if she's not, she's currently living in Canada, and she's basically relating this experience or talking about multiple experiences she's had, trying to connect with other people. Like, she'll go on a date with this guy and try to figure out, what are you interested in? And the guy will say, I'm into NASCAR, which is basically like the NBA or the NFL for car racing in the United States. So I'm into NASCAR and I went to this event, or I'm into this or that. But whenever she tries to take the conversation to something a bit more substantial, something of more substance, like, what do you think about only children? And maybe you've never heard that term. So only children are the child's, Jesus Christ. Only children are the children that have no siblings. So if you grew up in a house without a brother or a sister, you are an only child, which is a much more common thing to hear. But only children just describes the group of children that don't have siblings, right? So what do you think about only children? What do you think that experience is like? How do you think it affects them as they grow up? How do you think they're different from kids who grew up with siblings? And a lot of people will say, I've never really thought about that, never considered it. I don't know what I think about that. And then she'll go on to say something like, okay, what do you think about cancel culture? And maybe you call this something different in your language. So cancel culture is the trendy, well, to me, it's a trend. These days, it's trendy to try and destroy somebody's career and take away all their support and their way of making money because they said something that you didn't appreciate on the internet, right? For example, a couple of years ago during the Oscars, Will Smith slapped Chris Rock in the face on live TV. And a lot of people said we should cancel Will Smith. We should stop showing his movies. Don't give him any new roles in new movies. Stop supporting him. Stop saying his name. Fuck that guy. Let's cancel him. Let's act as if he never existed. For whatever reason, that is quite popular these days across the world, not just in the US. So that's cancel culture, right? And so she'll ask somebody, what do you think about that? And they're just like, I don't know. I don't know. And so she's frustrated at the end of the day. She's like, well, do you not think about anything? Is your brain turned on, bro? Like, what the fuck is going on here? So the main idea is that she's finding it very difficult to find other people who are engaged and thinking about the world and what's happening and what it's like to be somebody else, what it's like to put yourself in someone else's shoes. You see what I'm saying? So again, I don't think the language was too advanced, but now that I've expressed the idea in different words, I will play it one more time because it's only a minute long. So I'll play that and then we'll get into the actual takeaways and what I want you to consider after listening to this clip, how this is relevant to you as an English learner. So let's do it.
I'm the only person who thinks it's difficult to find someone who is interested in the world in general. Because I've been on dates and people are like, yeah, I'm really into going on road trips, and they tell you about it and it's cool, it's fun, or like, yeah, I'm really into NASCAR, I went to see this. And it's like, yeah, that's great. But then I'll ask, like, so what do you think of like only children? And they're like, I've never really thought about it. And I'm like, how have you never thought about the behavior and nature of only children? I'm like, oh yeah, what do you think about like cancel culture? Are you interested in that? I don't know. It's like, you don't have any questions about like people or the world? You just kind of do stuff and then only think about that? Or like, is your brain turned on? I don't understand.
All right, my friends. Now, as I've said 3 or 4 times already, hopefully it wasn't too difficult to understand. And if you have access to the vocab guide, go ahead and check that out. But now I want to get into the main takeaways because based on Zoe's words, I get a sense that she's someone who is deeply curious and inquisitive about the world around her. She seems to have a wide range of interests and a desire to understand complex social phenomena and human behavior. And so here's a quick summary of the takeaways from her video. The first one is the importance of intellectual curiosity. Zoe clearly values intellectual curiosity and being interested in understanding the world beyond just surface level hobbies or activities. And she gets frustrated when people don't seem to think critically about broader societal issues or human nature in general. The second thing, open mindedness. Her examples about wanting to discuss topics like only children or cancel culture suggest that she's open to exploring different ideas and perspectives, even if they are controversial. She's a very open minded person. And she craves depth, which is the third thing to take away. I get this sense that Zoe craves that depth or that substance in conversations and her relationships. Like simply discussing hobbies or daily activities isn't enough for her. She really wants to dive deep into the meaty topics, the substantial topics, the meaningful and interesting topics, and have conversations of real substance. And then the way Zoe says, do you not have any questions about people or the world? This highlights her own questioning, analytical mindset. She seems baffled or confused or surprised by people who don't actively ponder or think about the complexities of human existence. And so now that I've basically summarized what she was saying and what she's talking about, you might be sitting there asking yourself, how does this apply to me? Why should I care about this? How is this relevant? And I think Zoe's perspective and the desire for thoughtful conversations on a wide range of topics is highly relevant to someone like you because you're learning to speak English. And if you've been listening to the podcast for a while now, you know that my philosophy is that the only way to become a proficient English speaker or speaker of any language is by practicing, by talking to people, having countless conversations every single day, countless conversations about all kinds of topics. You see what I'm saying? So I want you to consider the following ideas. The first one, expanding your vocabulary. To engage in deep discussions on diverse topics like human behavior or societal issues or culture, you need to have a broad and nuanced vocabulary. You need to have lots of words at your disposal to not only understand what's being said to you, but to be able to express yourself exactly the way you want to. And simple conversations about hobbies and activities really only require a limited set of words. But exploring complex subjects requires mastering more advanced vocabulary, more advanced language. The second thing to consider is understanding context, as I briefly mentioned just a second ago, because languages are deeply rooted in cultural contexts. You've heard me say many times before, you really can't separate language from culture because our culture really influences how we use the language. And so, if you really want to understand English expressions and idioms or jokes and slang, you need exposure to conversations about a wide range of topics like history, societal norms, pop culture, family, food, and everything in between. Because the contextual knowledge is key when you're trying to understand anyone, anytime, anywhere. And the next thing to consider is the ability to think in English. Because Zoe, the girl in the clip, she highlights the need not just to discuss topics, but to think about them critically using your language. And for language proficiency, you've got to go from translating thoughts in your native language to forming thoughts directly in English. And the only way to get better at doing that is by writing every day and by speaking every day. The next thing to consider is natural dialogue, real conversations, because in real life, conversations organically veer into different subjects beyond basic chit chat. And a more simple way of saying that is in real life, conversations go from one topic to another and then another just naturally. You don't really control the flow of a conversation most of the time. And if you talk with somebody for an hour, you're probably going to discuss a lot of different stuff. And so to communicate naturally, you need to practice jumping from one topic to another, asking spontaneous questions, and familiarizing yourself with more than just your personal interests. And finally, the fifth thing to consider is confidence, right? The confidence to talk to anyone, anytime, anywhere. The confidence to understand anybody and to be able to express yourself clearly when talking to anybody. And that confidence comes from practice, as I've said many times, right? It increases the more you practice talking about all these different things. Your anxiety will reduce the more you speak to people. And so, in summary, the main point here is that if you limit yourself to superficial conversations about a handful of basic topics, you run the risk of developing a very compartmentalized or very basic English skills, a very basic set of vocabulary. Exploring diverse topics through thoughtful discussions mimics the authentic communication that we really practice and experience every day. And it speeds up the journey towards proficiency and natural self expression in the language. Now, maybe at this point in the podcast, I might have been using a lot of advanced vocabulary or speaking in very wordy ways, which means using lots of words to say very simple things. So I'll try to say it a different way without even reading my notes or anything like that. The real thing to take away from this clip, it's really twofold. There's two things to take away that are connected to each other. The first one is if you want to speak English proficiently, if you want to be able to express yourself in any situation, no matter who you're talking to, you have to practice. It's very simple and straightforward. Now, on the other hand, the second part of that is the way you do that is by exploring a bunch of different topics. That is the reason that I talk about something different in every episode. Now, obviously, a lot of episodes are about culture or psychology or philosophy most of the time. That's just what I'm interested in. But I really try to touch on stuff that I'm not familiar with. I try to touch on stuff that I know my listeners might be interested in, even if I'm not interested in that stuff, because you need to hear somebody speaking English about a bunch of different things. This is how you naturally learn vocabulary. That is how you learn vocabulary in your first language. Just by listening to a bunch of different people talk about a bunch of different stuff. It is the same exact concept when it comes to learning English. So if you want to get to that point where you can talk about anything at any time, you've got to step outside of your personal interests, outside of your comfort zone, and start reading about stuff you never really even considered. You have to start thinking about life, you know? And this isn't just about language. This is just about becoming an interesting person, a great communicator, because all of this applies to your native language. There are some people who think that they can't maintain conversations because they're speaking in a foreign language. But what most people don't understand is communication is universal. It's universal. So if you can't maintain a conversation in English, a lot of times it doesn't even have anything to do with vocabulary. Obviously, that's a big factor, but there are so many people out there who are intermediate speakers and can maintain a conversation with the vocabulary that they have, but they don't know how to talk to people. And they definitely don't know how to listen. Or when it's their turn to talk, they don't know what to say because it's a subject that they're unfamiliar with. You see what I'm saying? So I think that learning about communication skills and just learning about life in general will make you a better speaker and communicator no matter what language you're speaking or who you're talking to. Now, I'm not telling you what you have to do. I'm just telling you what I suggest you do, which again is consume content about things you're unfamiliar with, constantly be learning new things, having real conversations with real people who are interested in things that are different from the things that you're interested in. This is how you learn new words. This is how you make more friends. This is how you have more conversations. This is how you get better at speaking and expressing yourself. This is how you do it. Along with writing. That's why in every vocab guide, if there's not a quiz, I put writing prompts or speaking prompts. After you listen to the episode, think about these thought provoking questions and answer them. Write about them in your journal. Speak about them with a friend. Even if it's not in English, just go downstairs and talk to your brother, your sister, your girlfriend, your mom or your dad, your coworkers, whoever, and just start a conversation about these very interesting topics. You got to use your brain, man. You got to think critically about life if you want to be able to speak critically about life, which is something that, in my experience, a lot of people just don't do. We want to stay in our comfort zones, consume the same videos and podcasts and books and articles and tweets, etc. But stepping outside of our comfort zone to listen to people that we disagree with or to learn about things that aren't really the most interesting on the surface. We don't want to do that. It takes effort. It takes time. It takes energy. Fuck that. But I'm telling you right now, bro, if you want to be a better English speaker, if you want to be a better communicator in any language, then I highly suggest you start getting engaged. You start getting involved with the life that you're living, and not just your life, but the lives that other people are living. I know I'm being repetitive at this point. I know I am, but I can't find another way to say it. I really can't. So in summary, Zoe is asking herself, like, am I the only one that's like awake and thinking about life in general? Because most people she talks to, it seems like there's just nothing going on inside their head. And if you don't want to come across as one of those people, you've got to turn your brain on and start getting interested. Get curious about life, man. Start asking questions. Start seeking to understand, right? This is how you grow as a person. And it's how you become a better communicator. So we got a short and sweet episode today, man. This is something that I really want you to take some time to think about. Listen to the audio clip again if you need to. Listen to this episode again if you need to. But honestly, what I think would be best is to turn off the podcast and go talk to people, man. Just go talk to people about stuff that you don't know anything about. Go try to learn something. Because the more you talk to people who know things that you don't know and have interests that you don't necessarily have, you start to learn more about life. I'm not a fucking software engineer, but I've taught English to so many software engineers that now I can talk confidently and intelligently to software engineers for hours, even though I've never fucking written a software program. I'm just curious. I know how to listen, and I've talked to so many software engineers that I'm starting to get an understanding of how software works, how the industry works, what's important to software engineers, what makes them angry, what satisfies them. You see what I'm saying? The same thing with all pairs, the same thing with single mothers, the same thing with athletes. I just talk to so many different people. And more importantly, I listen to so many different people that I just naturally start getting this free education on what it's like to be other people, what it's like to live a lifestyle that's different from mine. That, in its essence, is the point. And all of that knowledge and experience, all of those conversations and stories that I've heard and debates that I've had and disagreements that I've had, they've all made me a smarter individual. They've made me better at listening and thinking critically and putting myself in other people's shoes, which makes it easier for me to communicate with people who share a different cultural background or language or lifestyle or religion, belief system, you name it. This is the way, my friend. This is the way. So if you can just trust me on this and start applying this, start listening to people, talking to people who you think you have nothing in common with, I guarantee you will learn more about this life and the people in it, which will make you a better communicator, which is exactly what you want.